West Indies, and young people would come to the lecture, because there is much that we wish to impart to you. You are the generation of promise, and you are the generation of fulfillment. And I'm speaking now particularly to our young black students, because our ancestors paid a tremendous price for us to be where we are today. And you are the generation that sometimes the elders don't quite understand, and there's a gap developing between our young and our elders. However, that gap can be bridged. The elders must never, ever allow the young not to know the stony road that we trod to get to where we are today. That is a mistake that the elders have made, not teaching our young people the history of our enslavement, the history of our suffering, the history of our accomplishments, and then going beyond the transatlantic slave trade to the origin of civilization that our fathers gave to Europe and the world. And if our children do not know the road that we've traveled, if our children do not know the past, then they're crippled in the present, and they're weak in their ability to prepare an adequate future. So today, I look at it as a great honor to me at my age to sit down with our young people as a student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and give you the wisdom that God has revealed for your eyes. If I may say, the Quran opens with Allah, God, introducing himself to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in the translations that I have read, the opening verses of Surah 2, Al-Baqarah, the cow, it starts like this: Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alif Lam Mim. And the translators say it means, I, Allah, am the best knower. So God is introducing himself to his prophet who could not read, who could not write, but he's telling him that he is being communicated with by one who is not the better knower, not one with a superior knowledge, but he was being spoken to by one who is the supreme knower of all that there is. So when you have someone like that that becomes your teacher, then how could you not rise from ignominy to greatness? So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, though he could neither read nor write, yet those words of Allah from the Quran allowed him to unite the tribes of Arabia into a great nation. And the Arabs, though they were steeped in ignorance and savagery, rose to become world leaders in every field of human endeavor. That is the benefit of having the best knower as your teacher. Well, if you juxtapose that with what is written in the Bible, it goes like this: my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Black people, yes, you and I have been victims because of our blackness, but that is not the real reason that we are behind other nations of the earth. The real reason is that the ignorance that has been imposed upon us since the transatlantic slave trade, allowing us to be chattel slaves for 300 years, depriving us of the human right to know, depriving us of education, depriving us of that which would raise us from the subhuman level to the human level and on to recognizing our own connection to the divine supreme being. So Allah, the best knower, has intervened in our affairs. Not that I am here to give you common knowledge. You can get that any day, any time, from your libraries, from your schoolrooms, from your professors. I'm not here to bring you that. I'm here to bring you supreme wisdom that came from the supreme being who has intervened in our affairs, that the black man who is on the bottom may rise to the top. And in your Bible, dear Reverend, if you look, he says the last will become the first, and the bottom rail would come to the top, and the tail shall be the head. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our sight. So I thank you, Brother David, for the many years of your struggle here, almost single-handed, unassisted, but yet you persevered. And on these radio airwaves, you did your best to bring knowledge to our people. And it is not that we are against other groups.
Greetings, beloved family. I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I bear witness that there is but one God. Welcome to the Black Agenda here on the Street 919 FM. I am Brother David Muhammad, and I'm going to be in studio with you up to 11 o'clock this evening. And in a short while from now, I will open up the telephone lines and take your calls on 342 my apologies, 342-0081 and 466-5391. You could also send text messages directly to me on 332-0214. And you can go to YouTube and Facebook. Just do a search for the Street 919 FM or Trini Bashment live stream. Beloved family, this evening on the Black Agenda, we pay respect to, acknowledge, and celebrate the wisdom of a great son of the soil of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm speaking of Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, born in Port of Spain, Trinidad, on June the 29th, 1941. Brother Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, would have been 79 years old today. And it is our brother Kwame Ture from Trinidad who was a major influential figure in the United States of America during the Civil Rights Movement. But he popularized the phrase which the world learned from him, the phrase being Black Power. Now, Black Power is not some temporary ideology. It's really eternal. And it's our intention this evening to share that perspective, but in particular give it relevance in the 21st century, as we're currently in a time period where there's been a resurgence of Black consciousness. And this Black consciousness globally is taking so many different forms, manifesting in so many different ways, being translated from a multitude of different perspectives, but all tying in to one common interrelated cause. And so let me also say, because of course, Brother Kwame Ture was inspired by his meeting with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he was a very close associate and colleague of the Nation of Islam, and he actually attended he was a guest speaker at every single annual Nation of Islam convention from 1981 all the way up to the last one that he attended in 1998 or 97, which was the last time that I met him, and all with the exception of 1996, which was the first Nation of Islam annual convention in Chicago that I attended. And on that day, February 26th, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan mentioned that this is the first year that Brother Kwame Ture is not with us. Of course, he was ill with cancer at that time, but he was back the year after, which is when I met him for the second time. And, of course, we have now named the Kwame Ture Education Center after our brother. Him, of course, not knowing at the time that he would have been revered by that destiny. So let's look at the wisdom and philosophy of Brother Kwame Ture. Let's fit it in with all that we see taking place around us in 2020 and beyond, in particular on the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement. And as a nation in Trinidad and Tobago, let's extract what we can of value from this and apply it to our communities in so many different ways. Because in my humble judgment, when you read the Black Power philosophy of Brother Kwame Ture, and we have really done our best to encapsulate his teachings in my second book, Knowledge is Power, 40 Lessons in Black Studies. Of course, there's a chapter on Kwame Ture, but there are actually two chapters that specially feature him. One, the chapter on Kwame Ture himself, but Chapter 3 in the book is entitled The Black Power Manifesto, where we took his philosophy and structured it in an academic form so that we can utilize the benefits of his consciousness. So, I want to start off looking at, from Kwame Ture's point of view, racism and the term that he coined, which is institutionalized racism. Brother Kwame Ture did not coin the phrase Black Power. As a matter of fact, there was a book that was written in 1954 by Richard Wright entitled Black Power. It was a novel. And then politician Adam Clayton Powell used the term in 1966. But it was on June 16, 1966, at a speech in Mississippi, that Kwame Ture launched the phrase as a slogan that we're now going to attach to ourselves as a mission for our whole community, that we must gain Black Power. So even though the phrase was used before or coined prior, it was Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, who popularized the phrase, but he did coin the phrase institutionalized racism in his analysis of Black Power and the relationship of the Black community to wider societies. So first I'm going to look at racism according to Kwame Ture, then institutionalized racism according to Kwame Ture, and then the relationship between the Black community and the wider society. So Kwame Ture in Black Power explained, he said, quote, that racism means the predication of decisions and policies on considerations of race for the purpose of subordinating a racial group and maintaining control over that group. The key phrases or key words there are decisions, policies, and control. Decisions, policies, and control. So, from this perspective, in order to be a victim of racism, you have to be subjected to decisions that are being made by others, policies that are being implemented in the best interest of others, and as a result of this, you're subsequently controlled by others. Now, Dr. Maulana Karenga has described or defined racism as the denial and deformation of a people's history, heritage, and their contemporary reality, and the misallocation of resources and power. So, if someone can control you and your community through decisions and policies, that means they have a power over you. And the idea of black power is to regain control, not to regain visibility, not to regain employment, not to regain a situation where you're temporarily comfortable only because you think that you don't deserve the full standard of living and quality of life of every other ethnic group within a cosmopolitan society. Because if they lower your self-esteem and lower your perception of your own value and worth as black people and then give you next to nothing, you will celebrate the fact that you have something as minuscule as it is because you don't know the value that you possess. So part of our educational system, part of our religious training, part of our entire experience within a colonial educational system is to devalue black life and to make us feel less worthy and to lower our collective community consciousness so that we are happy with being second-class and third-class citizens. So those are factors that were introduced. Remember, the three key words from Kwame Ture's definition of racism are decisions, policies, and control. And we combine these three concepts and redefine them as power, a power that is not there for us to observe, but a power that is there for us to reclaim. And that power that needs to be reclaimed by us being in control of our own policies and decision-making is black power. Institutionalized racism now was defined by Brother Kwame Ture as the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. Brother Kwame Ture explains, eventually, institutionalized racism dominates major institutions within society that are responsible for justice. And it is reinforced by the actions of conformists and newcomers. Let me pause there for a moment. Because, again, we pick out, and in all my classes with my students, when we're explaining a concept, we try to pull out or extract the key words, the key concepts, the key ideas that are driving an ideology. If Kwame Ture is saying the collective failure, this is institutionalized racism, the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to a people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin, a key word here is eventually. Eventually, institutionalized racism dominates major institutions within the society. It is not an instant application of a series of systems, but it's slow, it's steady, it's gradual. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, as an example of a standard multicultural cosmopolitan Caribbean society, there is a very, very shallow perception of what racism is. So remember, as we wrote in Black Studies, there are 7 main types of racism, which start off with bigotry, intolerance, xenophobia, ethnocentrism, prejudice, segregation and stratification, and at the highest level, institutionalized racism. But when we go right down to the bottom level of bigotry and intolerance, we try to convince ourselves that because people don't call you names in public anymore, because you're not called a nigger by someone who is white, or because as a black person, if you sit down next to someone of another race, that they may not immediately get up and leave, and that there is social intermixing between black people and non-black people, we try to convince ourselves that racism doesn't exist anymore. We try to convince ourselves all these slogans. I actually heard with my own ears a man on the radio saying there's no racism in Trinidad because he went to a wedding, and at that wedding there was roti on one side, there was barbecue on the other side, and all the black people had the roti and all the Indian people had the barbecue. Therefore, there is no racism. Or around Carnival Day, if you look at the band, you see white people and black people jumping up together, dancing and socially intermixing, and because of that, there's no racism. You go to a football match or a cricket game, you see Africans, Indians, whites, Chinese all together sitting in the stand, and because of that, there is no racism. Or you go to some other sporting event, or you go to the beach, and you see people of all races and colors, and they try so desperately in such a infantile way mentally to make that point that they end up including all different kinds of colors. They say, well, if you go to the beach, if you go to Carnival, if you go to a football event or a sporting event in Trinidad or in any Caribbean society, there are black people, white people, brown people, red people, yellow people. Then even going to pink and green and orange and purple people. It is so ridiculous because it is so wrong. But in all of those considerations of whether or not racism is still in existence, none of them raise questions about land ownership, business entrepreneurship, the banking sector, economic opportunities, and those in positions of financial power and influence that have a stranglehold on those who run for political elections as a face or window dresser for black people. We don't talk about any of that. We don't talk about the prison population being almost 95% African. We don't talk about the fact that our young men, black youth, are gunned down in the street like dogs. And let me make this point while we're at it and share this, people. Because black life in Trinidad is no less of worth than black life in America. We stand in solidarity with every single extrajudicial killing that takes place of a black man in America by the white police or otherwise. We stand in solidarity in Trinidad and Tobago, in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Guyana, in Antigua, across the entire Caribbean, when George Floyd was slain, or Ahmaud Arbery, or Tamir Rice, or Freddie Gray, or Jordan Davis, or Trayvon Martin, or Michael Brown. We stand in solidarity with all of them. But we cannot sit by idly when the police begin to execute our own black brothers right here in Trinidad, and then we start to congratulate the police force for getting rid of whom are now referred to as menaces and pests. That is a mental sickness. It's like you're devaluing yourself. So, as usual, when we heard of the 3 men killed by the police in Mova, and the story went that they opened fire on the police, shot and missed, the police returned fire and hit, case closed, and then people feel a little more comforted. But then this video is released, and the video shows clearly that the account of the police was certainly not what happened based on what was seen in the video with men with their hands up. One even turned around twice, surrender in surrender mode, not armed, no weapon in their possession, but ended up being executed. All of us who stood up and felt the pain of the execution of George Floyd should have felt equally for those 3 brothers up in Mova. But some of you, and really one of our biggest problems as a black community across the entire Caribbean, is this social class distinction and discrimination that divides and rules black people even more so than racism divides the races of people and subordinates the black man. Our internal classism, which is a version of internal discrimination that is largely aligned with pigmentocracy or skin color discrimination among black people themselves, in particular in Caribbean societies. Geographical area discrimination is a bigger problem among us than some of the racism that is practiced by other races against us. Because when a racist Syrian or a local Trinidad white woman or a racist East Indian person goes on social media and rants about how much they hate African people, how much they're disgusted by African people, how African people are by nature like to riot and loot and cause trouble and fight, every time they take to social media, that should make us think. As Bobby Seale of the Black Panthers said, we don't fight racism with racism, we fight racism with solidarity. And if a racist Syrian or white or Chinese or Indian takes to social media and starts to verbalize their disdain for black people, that should not be the first time that we start to question, okay, well, where is a black business that I could go and support now? Where's the black business director, the Black Agenda Project organization, followed by and structured under the 9 ministries of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan from the Millions More movement of 2005, the 10th anniversary of the Million Man March. We assembled a black business directory more than 10 years ago. But now we're jolted into reality, and now people are, and I'm not condemning anyone who's asking for the black business directory now. No, I'm not condemning anyone because I know nothing happens before it's time. And for those of you who want a free copy of the Trinidad Black Business Directory, we're currently updating it, but the version that we have, we've been sending out by the dozens. Just email blackagendaproject@gmail.com and we will send you a free copy of it. But I don't want to get sidetracked, but just a few weeks before, a brother named Billy Toucey was killed by the police. Same story, that he shot at them, they returned fire and killed him. You have the True Mackett 5, those 5 young men in late October 2018 who were executed by the police in True Mackett, Laventille. You have Shaquille McCoy. You have brother Tristan Cobbler, who was talking to his mother on the phone when the police were looking for him to shoot him. He was already shot in the leg, and his mother is hearing her son on the phone begging the police not to shoot him. But later on in the evening, that same mother looks at a news report that says that he was shooting at them. Same thing with Nigel Caesar. Again, same story, that he shot at the police and missed, the police shot back and hit, and he's dead. But the chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Valerie Alexandrov, said no way that could be true because this man was shot in the back while running away from the police and he was unarmed. But the police stick to their story. But now that there's a video out, it's being taken a bit more seriously. What about 17-year-old Ricardo Muhammad, who was slapped by a police officer? Very common occurrence in Trinidad. But a few days later, he is killed by the same police officer, allegedly by accident. What are the odds for you to slap me today in hostile aggression and then kill me by accident tomorrow? And we buy that story. What about 14-year-old Naomi Nelson in Carenage, who was actually related to Bernadette James, who in the late 1980s was shot in the head on a training exercise by the military in Tucker Valley? An accident, they said. What about Dylan Bandy Skeet, Joel Tosh, and the filmmaker from Jamaica, who, according to eyewitnesses, again, they were actually filming a movie called Lights of Laventille. So many eyewitnesses talk about them being lined up against the wall and being executed. How much of this can we take before we begin to collectively question our intelligence that in all these cases, and for those of you who saw the video of that issue up in Mova, who is going to open fire on this group of, I don't know how many police vehicles it was. And those men were in riot gear. I'm getting back on track, but I want you to follow this, because I was having a discussion with someone about the tone and the nature and the boldness and the militarization of the police forces across the Caribbean. And when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was in Trinidad in March 2012, and he spoke at Napa in Port of Spain, he explained that one of the conditionalities for structural adjustment programs dictated largely by the World Bank and the IMF, in order for you to be compatible with that first world, third world relationship, and for you to qualify for these development programs, you have to militarize your police force. Okay. So those of you who are around my age, you would remember, because when I was a child, I remember seeing the police, short pants, little gray shirt, short sleeve gray shirt with a little pen and a pad in the pocket, little hat, revolver on one side and baton on the other side, and the little tall socks. And that was the police, when we hardly had crime in comparison to today. Back then, unless it was like Randolph Burroughs himself on some kind of exercise, you hardly used to hear about extrajudicial killings of young black men. But as Minister Farrakhan explains, all of these third world countries are being coerced into transforming their police service into a military force type operating unit that, instead of having as their objective and agenda to defend the borders of the country, they are defending the rich from the poor, defending the elitist ruling class from the poor working class. And because of the inequality and unequal distribution of wealth, it is inevitable that every single citizen in that society perceives themselves as being the recipient of justice. So not if, but when the poor rise up, as Karl Marx explained in his theories on capitalism, that eventually there will be such disdain among the masses that they will transform, he used the word overthrow, capitalism, and return to a utopian state, which was the case prior to the Industrial Revolution or industrialization. Read the writings of our first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams, in Capitalism and Slavery, who exposed to us the connection between capitalism and slavery. And slavery was taking place. It started really before capitalism was fully introduced. But now there was a period when both slavery and capitalism were in coexistence. But now slavery in its traditional chattel sense is over, but capitalism remains. And capitalism remains to the degree that it has replaced slavery and made slavery conditions invisible to the social observer. So now we are happy. We actually celebrate when we get a job. Under capitalism, where the terms and conditions of the employment that we have under capitalism are almost identical to the work arrangement that we had during slavery. The only difference is back then we knew it was slavery, but today we don't know. And in Trinidad, we have to become sensitive enough to all Black lives. It's like, yeah, all of us support Black Lives Matter. That is our mantra. That is our slogan. But it's like we have to put that all. I know some of you want to take out the black and put in all. I know some of you want to say that. But it's like we have to put an all in front of black to say all Black Lives Matter. Not just American Black lives, but all Black Lives Matter. Whether it's the police who are killed because the 32-year-old police brother We also mourn his senseless killing. We also lift our voices in objection to when a brother in the community kills a police officer. We also lift our voices in condemnation, and we stand in support of our brothers in the police when they are killed, or the prison officers when they are killed. It's the same black life. But we cannot judge and measure the worth of some black lives in comparison to other black lives. So when we see a foreign situation in America taking place, and the people come out and march in the streets by the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands, and then we see the exact same thing happening on our doorstep in Trinidad or Jamaica or Barbados or Guyana or Antigua, that we turn a blind eye and say, well, yeah, the police are dealing with crime. That's a mental sickness, beloved, trust me. So let's zoom right back in now to Kwame Ture. We're looking at his definition on institutionalized racism. So we looked at Brother Kwame Ture's definition of racism, where he says the predication of decisions and policies on considerations of race for the purpose of subordinating a racial group and maintaining control over that group. The key words that we extracted were decisions, policies, and control. Then he defined institutionalized racism. He also coined the phrase, as I said. Brother Kwame Ture defined institutionalized racism as the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. And then the key word here that we pulled out is eventually. He says, eventually, institutionalized racism dominates major institutions within society that are responsible for justice. And then it is reinforced by the actions of the conformists and the newcomers. Look at it. So as you were making the point, institutionalized racism doesn't pop up immediately, but as a result of patterns of ideology, methods of prolonged discrimination over an extended period of time, that we become so accustomed to it, we almost become immune to it. It's like we can't even recognize it anymore. So it eventually takes root. After it becomes from one generation to a second generation, then it becomes culture. And then once it becomes a culture, it becomes institutionalized, and then racism becomes the new normal. That is when it is institutionalized. So it eventually dominates. But then after it sets in, that institutionalized racism then is reinforced by conformists and newcomers, according to Brother Kwame Ture. Now, think about that. So there are those who conform to it, but he makes a distinction between the conformists and the newcomers. So there are those who experience it, witness it, then conform to it. But the newcomers don't even really have to conform to it because it's already there for them, served on a platter. They don't know anything else. So the thing about institutionalized racism is you could be there within the system and not be able to identify any one person who is racist. Not one person, but they're following a trend, they're following a pattern, they're following a culture, they're following a methodology, they're going along with the rules, regulations, policies, and instructions of the institution, which are inherently rooted in racism, but their personal opinion. They may go to work and go home every day and complain about the institution that they're employed by. They may have a personal view that is in contradiction to the agency that they're conforming to. But the racism has already become institutionalized. Then Kwame Ture says, another difficulty in reducing institutionalized racism is that there's no sole, true, identifiable perpetrator. When racism is built into institutions, it appears as the collective action of the population. Now, I'm going to speed up on this. Kwame Ture says the concept of black power must be adopted, and it rests on the fundamental premise that before a group can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. Then he says group solidarity is necessary before a group can operate effectively from a bargaining position of strength in a pluralistic society. That we will take as our thesis statement for Trinidad and Tobago, because we are always talking about the races uniting, the races integrating, us coming together. We have to be one. There's one love. But Brother Kwame Ture is saying, no, you cannot do that until you first consolidate your group strength and power. Because if we as a unit are not united, and we go and try to integrate with everyone. Oh, I have a Chinese friend and my Indian people. Oh, no, I love the white people. Oh, the Syrians, they're all... I have so many Syrian partners. And you go knocking on everyone's door and you haven't patched up issues with your neighbor as yet, then we will integrate from a position of weakness. There are ethnic minorities in Caribbean societies whose numbers are so small, but their unity and solidarity is so big that even though in some societies they're only 1, 2, or 3% of the populations, their unity within that 1, 2, or 3% has a greater impact than our numbers by the millions who are disunited, divided, fragmented, broken up, and destroyed ideologically to even see ourselves as one people. We have that challenge pending to even recognize that we are brothers and sisters. When I was blessed to be one of the opening speakers for the 22nd anniversary of the Million Man March before the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in New Jersey in 2017, and the minister had wanted me to speak on the Caribbean region around a time where there was natural disasters sweeping through our zone, and we were standing in need of assistance and support of each other as Caribbean nations. I had made the point that our enemies went to Africa, took us out of Africa on a ship. We were one family, one people, one community. We were relatives. But when we were taken out of Africa, the former slave master dropped each of us off on different pieces of rock. One called Jamaica, one called Barbados, one called Trinidad, one called St. Kitts, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Antigua, Dominica, Grenada. And then now the ship is passing back around to pick us all back up. And all of a sudden we're saying, but you're not my relative. You're not my family. You and me aren't one. Stay away from me. So you mean to say that when we were on the slave ship coming over, we were relatives, brothers, sisters, family members, blood of each other's blood, bone of each other's bone, flesh of each other's flesh? And now only because that slave ship dropped us off on these different pieces of rock, that somehow made us no longer family members? And now we want to sooner identify with the piece of rock that the slave master placed us on instead of identifying by our blood, our heritage, our history, our consciousness, our spirit, our root in the geographical location called Africa, but that we were black even before we were African, made in the image and likeness of God himself. And you're going to tell me that we're going to abandon all of that for some new passport that isn't even 60 years old as yet on a Caribbean island when we are an African people, one community, family, we're relatives to each other. And we have abandoned all of that simply because when that slave master dropped us off on all these different pieces of rock and left us, he left us with an ideology that was toxic and poisonous, that promoted self-hatred within and among us and made us see ourselves as our own worst enemies. And so we ask the question, if someone wanted to kill you and you knew that they wanted to kill you and they mixed a drink for you and hand it to you, would you drink that knowing that that person wants to kill you? You most certainly will not. Well, imagine someone wants to enslave you. Both you, but in particular, your children, and even more so, your children's children. And you know that this person wants to enslave you, then they write a book and say, here, I want you to give this to your children to read. Would you give it to them to read? Well, it's kind of too late because we already did. And all of that self-hatred has been recycled and circulated within and among us. Now, time is running, so let me get to a main part here of Black Power by Kwame Ture. Now, one point that I always make is that in the book Black Power, Chapter 2 is entitled Black Power. So if in the book called Black Power, Chapter 2 is entitled Black Power, then what could Chapter 1 possibly be about? What could Chapter 1 be named? And Chapter 1 in the book Black Power is entitled White Power. Let's see what Kwame Ture says. He says in Chapter 1, White Power, the white power structure rules the black community through local blacks who are responsive to white interests. These black politicians do not exercise effective power. They cannot be relied upon to make forceful demands on behalf of their black constituents, and they become no more than puppets. They put loyalty to a political party before loyalty to their constituents, and thus nullify any bargaining power the black community might develop. Does that sound familiar? Now, he says that these black politicians are controlled not by white people necessarily, but by the white power structure. And going back to the English-speaking Caribbean, after that host of labor riots, uprisings, and rebellions in the mid-1930s, and there was the Moyne Commission to decide on how could we stop these black people from rioting. One of the solutions to the problem for white people in the Caribbean was to let black people vote. So in 1946, they passed full adult suffrage, and now the same poor black people who would have engaged in uprising, rebellion, and revolution against the white economics and the colonial authorities, now they put black faces in power and authority, and they felt through the Moyne Commission that if we allow black people to vote and they vote in each other, then when they have these problems, they won't riot against us white people. They will riot against their own people. It was sharp, tricky strategy. And so read all of the historians in Trinidad, Professor Bridget Brereton, Professor Selwyn Ryan, Michael Anthony, Dr. Donald Woods. They all comment around that time when full adult suffrage came into play, and all of the white politicians, because you had a party, POPPG, and people like Albert Gomes and other whites who were the main political figures, but slowly but surely began to withdraw and establish themselves more dominantly, silently, in the background in business and controlling of the economy. And they supported black faces coming forward. And these black faces coming forward, they felt could represent their interests. And so campaign financing became a temptation for the black politician, who also at the same time had to elicit the support of black voting numbers. And this is why Dr. Eric Williams in 1961, just 1 year before Trinidad and Tobago became independent, he gave that magnificent speech, Massa Day Done. And he warned our society that we are about to enter into a stage and a phase where we will be independent. It won't just be the colonials taking over our industry and finances now, but there are local whites who also have that same stranglehold and control over the economy, who will want to be like the new colonial masters. And Dr. Eric Williams says that day is done. But we ask, is it? Kwame Ture continues. He says, colonial politics causes the subject to muffle his voice while he is participating in the councils of the white power structure. He says the black man forfeits his opportunity to speak forcefully and clearly for his race, and he justifies this in terms of expediency. I'm going to come back to that in a short while. First, when one talks of a Negro establishment, in most places they are talking of an establishment resting on a white power base of hand-picked blacks, whom that base projects as showpieces out front. He says a final aspect of political colonialism is the manipulation of political boundaries and the devising of restrictive electoral systems. The decision makers are most adept at devising ways or utilizing existing factors to maintain their monopoly of political power. The black community is sapped senseless of what economic resources it has, and through the exploitative system of credit, people pay $1 down, $1 a week, literally for years. So we remain poor through those systems. The interest rate is astronomical, and the merchandise of relatively low quality in the first place is long since worn out before the final payment. So we spend our entire lives locked in some kind of financial relationship with an oppressor. Now, let me begin to conclude with this, and it looks like I'll have to continue this tomorrow, inshallah. Because there are 8 chapters in Black Power. We just touch in chapter 1. On page 11 of Black Power, Kwame Ture explains that indirect rule is another feature of colonial politics, which is the method of local colonial administrations through the agency of chiefs who exercise executive rule. On page 12, he explains that these politically appointed black leaders are only as powerful as their white kingmakers will permit them to be. The white political bosses could rule the black community in the African colonies by indirect rule. Now, on page 46, he says, only black people can convey the revolutionary idea that black people are able to do things for themselves. And he says, yes, this is most certainly a revolutionary idea. He said only they can help create in their community an aroused and continuing black consciousness that will provide the basis for political strength. I want that one to stick with us. That only through a sustained, aroused, and continuous black consciousness can we gain a political strength that will heal our communities and serve our people. Then Kwame Ture says, black power means, and he gives some examples here. This is pause raising. Kwame Ture says, as examples, black power means that a black sheriff can end police brutality, that a black tax assessor and tax collector can lay, collect, and channel tax monies for the building of better roads and schools that are serving black people. Power must be used to exercise control. For as long as black people are dependent on the political machine or the democratic machine, their interests will always be secondary to that machine. And I'll wind up here, because he's saying black power so we're talking about black power. And in the next chapter of Black Power, of course, Kwame Ture begins to talk about our direct relationship with power. Let me just give you a little touch of that chapter 2. Kwame Ture says in chapter 2, entitled Black Power, one of the tragedies of the black struggle against racism is that there's been the lack of national organizations which could speak to the growing militancy of our youth in the urban ghettos. When the concept of black power was set forth in the past, many conjured up ideas of violence. In the past also, and even today, some have advocated that social justice will be accomplished by integrating the Negro into the mainstream institutions of the society that have previously excluded him. Damn! So it's like they shut the door in your face and say, we don't want you here among us. And you knocking and knocking, please like me, please accept me, please take me in, please see me as a brother. And then when they open that door and let you in, you call that progress. Remember what Malcolm X said. He said, if you run a knife into my back 12 inches and then pull it out 6 inches, that is not progress. You have to measure progress from the point of view of before the knife was even inserted into your back. So it's like someone is robbing you through your taxation that is unjust every month of $700. $700 this month, $700 next month, $700 the month after. And then they rob you of $600 the month after that, and you want to celebrate our own self-imposed low standards, our lack of belief in who we are, our failure to see our own self-worth. So we accept anything. And we have measured success. And Kwame Ture is saying this is a big mistake. That we, in our struggle against racism, we want to measure the success of it by how many white friends we have, how many Chinese friends we have, how many Indian friends we have. And this is why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad saw as a solution to black people's community problems that they must separate and build and create institutions and businesses and organizations and movements among themselves. That they must separate and earn and develop farm land, grow their own food, rear their own animals, establish our own health clinics and hospitals, have our own schools and learning centers and educational institutions, have our own businesses to buy and sell, not just among ourselves, but also to do trade with other black communities. Only then will we learn and earn the respect that we deserve. But for as long as you're knocking on someone else's back door for them to one day see you as an equal and abandon their 400-year-old hatred of you, you're looking at that as progress. You think progress is with them changing their minds about you. No, progress is you changing your mind about yourself and your community and your people and seeing us as one black nation. And I mean, on that, with all that's been happening, Black Lives Matter movements and the pulling down of statues and the complaints against police brutality and us uniting and lifting our voices on Saturday, July 4th, this Saturday coming, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan will be speaking live for the first time since February, a message to the world on what is happening. Don't miss that. www.noi.org. And next week on the Black Agenda, we're going to analyze that full speech. So let me conclude here. This is in the chapter Black Power. We have advocated that social justice will be accomplished by the Negro integrating into the mainstream. So I want to close on this point where Kwame Ture gives these examples of what Black Power is. And maybe tomorrow I'll deal with the chapter Dynamite in the Ghetto, because you're seeing that with our brothers and sisters in Mova who came out to protest today. We so misunderstand that. And I was saying to someone in reference to the George Floyd protests, we really don't have any moral authority whatsoever to tell a black man that he should not protest for justice when the very civilization that he is in was built, developed, and created on free slave labor, which today is one of the most heinous of crimes. And if in Mova, Trinidad, or New York in America, or London, England, wherever you see black people rioting or protesting, you see a black man throw a rock, and then a window is broken, that window would not have been broken if the system was not broken. And the system has been broken, and he is the victim of an institutionalized disorder and chaos where some wealthy elitist minorities benefit from the fact that there is mass poverty and unequal distribution of wealth. So when the black man rises up in the ghetto to riot, as Ice Cube once said, riots are like diets for the system, because the system is characterized by the wealthy elites becoming so fat with the money that belongs to everybody. And so when there's a riot, when there's a protest, when there's a demonstration, and they reassess and reconsider the unequal distribution of wealth or the oppression and exploitation and tyranny that they're exercising over the people, all of a sudden the system now begins to wonder, should we become more fair? Should we share more justice? Should we show some compassion to the masses? So it's like the system is dieting, because riots are like diets for the system. And those in positions of authority and leadership now reconsider their position of being haughty and arrogant and disrespectful through their neglect and abandonment of the masses, and say, you know what? We have to give something now. We can no longer hoard in the way we were before. So when that black man throws that rock, and the window or the glass is broken, it's because the system is broken, and he is the victim of it. Beloved family, I pray that something that I said would have made sense to you in one way or another. Don't forget the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Saturday, July 4th at 11 o'clock Eastern Caribbean time, will be speaking to the world and shedding light and wisdom. And I say go to www.blackagendaproject.com for all the relevant information. And everything that I shared with you today is in my second book from the chapter 29 on Kwame Ture, Knowledge is Power. And right now on the website, I have a special offer, both books, Black Studies, which is 433 pages, 370 references, 10 chapters, jam-packed and condensed with information. And then Knowledge is Power, 40 Lessons in Black Studies, which is a student-friendly academic review of all of this knowledge through teaching and learning content based on a syllabus and a curriculum. And today we did the lesson on Kwame Ture. You get both books for $53 US, which is 2 for the price of 1. So go on to www.blackagendaproject.com and you can make those purchases right away and share this information with our children. All well and good, us, yes, but share the information with our children. So, beloved family, let's open up the telephone lines and have a discussion. Tell me what you think. 342-0081 and 466-5391. It is now 10 past 10. 10 past 10. And I will have to continue this tomorrow, inshallah. So let's go to the phones. 342-0081, 466-5391. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Good evening, Brother David Mohammed.
Good evening, my brother.
All details, Auntie.
Alhamdulillah.
Brother David Mohammed has been speaking about this police killing for the longest while. And it continues. Now, we live in a multi-racial, multi-cultural, as they say, multi-ethnic. So you find that African people issues, you find a lot of people of different races. They always speak out against African people problems that we have. Mm-hmm. And African people, some of them, support these different races for whatever reason. I believe is political reasons, because they align to some political party, and these other races, some of them align to the party. So the Africans supporting racism from other ethnic groups and saying, all right, we are with you, because they are of the same political party. Now I want the African people to open their eyes. Now this police killing going on, and the police always uses this excuse that they pull gun at them, and this has been going on. Now, why is it that the police would not allow, the police commissioner would not allow the police to wear these body cameras, so that whenever this killing takes place, the police could say, okay, this is what happened because we have it here on camera. But they're not allowing the police then to wear any cameras because they have something to hide. Now, we African people, we should be standing up against this police killing for the longest while and protesting. But some of us, we like it because somebody get robbed and they brand all the black youths on them, all the African black youths on them, to be criminals. So whenever the police kills, they justify and say, yeah, that's good. Right? They kill a man quite in America, a black man. And we have a group of people here protesting. All that is good. But we have the killing going on right there. The police doing it, and they don't have to give account to anybody. Because what they tell you is that investigation is going on, you get nothing after. This PCA they have here is a living dead institution. Because they don't take up these issues at all. Right? And it's time we African people stand up against all this police killing in this country. Because it's about almost 30 people have been, African youth, been killed by the police. Almost 30. It's a record anywhere in the Caribbean. And the police commissioner always have some kind of defense and given some kind of reason why the police did that. Right? And we people condoling that and saying, go Gary. But they're not looking at the big picture.
That's the sickness coming out.
That is, David Mohammed, every day when I get the police killed, this is black things on them. Especially what happened yesterday with these 3 people being killed.
Mm-hmm.
That has hurt my heart. And what has hurt me more is when we African people condoling this and saying, go Gary. Now, as far as I see, this police commissioner, I see he hasn't done anything to prove this crime as so far, because the murder rate still costs up 500 and more. So I don't know what it is so special about this man. Maybe he's killing the black youths and them. I think is that why people beginning up so much and saying that he's so good? Because they think these youths and them, all of them is bandits. So they think that he's doing something good. But he are killing our black children. Right? I somehow I feel this man has some racist agenda. I've been real. Right? And we African people, all please stop condoling this killing by the police. Stop it.
And at the same time, condemning the foreign ones.
That's right. No, let me say this. Once again, my people, this situation is getting bad and worse every time. Please, all don't condone the police in this killing. And these police officers, I want you all to know, and all the politicians and them, who not saying anything, they sit down there on the fat backside and have nothing to say. Because all of them like that. All they eating blood money. All the police officers, all the young black police officers, all they eating blood money. There's a law of nature, the law of God. When retribution starts to come upon all for all this wrongdoing, all the killing innocent people, and saying they pull gun at all here, there's a consequences to that according to the law of God. And all the politicians who sit down there, all the black politicians, sit down there and have nothing to say. Eating blood money and drinking blood every day. Because the police killing people and all have nothing to say, all they sit down there. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed.
Thank you so much, my brother, for calling in. Caller, good evening.
Yeah, beloved.
How you doing, sir?
And blessings to the Most High after God and keeping His powers. Do I acknowledge the situation? I want to say compliments to Brother Coming to
Yes, sir. 79 years old. Next year, we want to have a big celebration.
Blessings to the powers and knowledge that the brethren what trait for Hannah in the future. Because most of them brethren of knowledge that is revealing in this time. But it's who have eyes to see will see, and ears to hear will listen, and then they will hear. Some of us only talking, but we're not listening. So, my brethren, within and I acknowledge I see Shan. I try the man putting up his hand and spinning around. The next one push out here through the window. And then I hear him being dead. What kind of crime and tricks is this? This kind of technology, we want better technology where people's life is concerned. And then the brethren marching and disrupting the place. But the system is so technical that the whole point about it is Africa, only the poor man will feel it. You keep on feeling it, you keep on feeling it, and we keep on talking. Father, only God know in this COVID time what's going on. You need. I wouldn't cry. I don't want to cry on no diseases, on no problem, no destruction onto this land. But man, only judgment will tell you. Guidance, my brethren. Keep strong.
Thanks a lot, my dear brother. All right. 342-00814665391. You're listening to The Black Agenda here on the Street 919 FM. Let me try the overseas line. Caller, good evening.
Yes, good night to you, Mr. Mom.
Yes, good evening. How are you doing?
A couple of points. Firstly, I want to address the push in general. I think it's important to be honest. about the reality of Trinidad. The only reason that we have the promotion we have now is because of racism.
Caller?
The process.
Caller, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, just one thing. I don't know if you heard, but a couple persons who are really interested in hearing what you have to say, including myself, were concerned about the quality of your call. And I don't know if you can...
Hello?
Yeah. I think a part of the problem seems to be breathing heavily into the phone. So I don't know if you could address that. Yeah, are you hearing me? Caller? Can you hear me?
Hello?
All right, you can try calling us back, but we were concerned about the quality of your calls as well. But try calling us back, and when you do, you can. I'll try to relay those comments again. Good evening, caller.
Assalamu alaikum. Today, Salim Baradibil.
Walaikum salam, my brother.
It's a sad day in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, Baradibil, when I knew that there was a revenge killing, you kill one of us, we will kill some of you. When I heard the same night it happened, the commissioner of police stating that those are not, they're not the person who killed, or the people who killed the policeman. Go back on his statement, you'll hear him stay, in other words, what he's saying, they're not the people and them. Go back on his statement, he made that the night when it happened on the TV, I heard him say, that is a revenge killing. You understand? And what it is, I want to draw something to your attention. You know, in this country, we just talk about the same police talking about corruption and we're coming to clean up and all kind of thing. Watch the program they have going on the evening on the television, and you will see corruption take score. And I want to hear what Gary when you say about that program. He ain't saying nothing, because somebody had mentioned it already. How it is they have all these advertisements going on a program that the police is running, and they said no, that this police is paying for it, and then they stop the advertisement. But look at the program in the evening and see there's about 20 minutes advertising on a program that has been run by the paid for, he said, by the police. But it's a money making program. They have to talk about corruption and talk about black people, African youth who robbing planes sort of thing. Watch and see corruption going on that program. Every little evening, there was a program with an Indian man who said that he could clean everybody from all kind of sickness. Yeah, about 8 or 9 people here on the program, somebody had called and talk about that in the early, and they stop it, and then they come back with it again. Easy, you know why? Because they say we just forget. You understand? We just forget. By watching it every evening, is watching that program now. That is corruption to the core. Because that's not a police program, that's a business you're running there. You understand? And it's what if you listen to every evening, you listen to Alexander on the program, they want to equate, you understand, what's going on in America with Trinidad. What's called Black Life and Black Life and Black Life Matter and Black Life Matter, you understand? It's something
is that
totally
what he said?
Different. Huh?
So wait, you're saying that was said?
But Alexander keep talking all the time about Black Lives Matter. Anything happen, that Black Lives Matter and Black Lives too. When the police kill somebody, they say it's Black Lives, you understand? But when a criminal kills somebody, they talk about Black Lives Matter. He talking that all the time. All the time he talk about. And if you listen to that program is actually preaching violence, It actually preaching violence. It's not talking about stopping violence.
Just to make the point though, it is correct that if a police officer is killed, that we invoke the idea of Black Lives Matter in the same way if someone is killed by a police officer.
I have no problem, but
right.
the terms but what you're trying to do...
You're saying that the way that is used. All right, okay, yeah.
Yes, you understand, and if you look at something, there was a program that was running on the TV, no something matter. You understand? They using that, you understand, in a kind of degrade what is taking place, but they can't stop it. They can't stop it. I want to say something. 39 years ago, the athlete that went, what's his name, something Michael, that raised his hand and made the power sign, and they kick him out of the games and take away everything from him, and he ended up washing cars to mind his family. Became like a vagrant. the youth today who have come out in support, you understand, of the Black Lives Matter. A lot of them was even born when he go through that humiliation. I see they don't accept him and this sort of thing to the hall or something. They was even born. So the struggle that he started and what he faced is a continuation of what it is they are doing today. Or you see Princeton University, they're going to change the name. You understand? These are things.
Yeah. You're seeing a lot of that these days
across the world.
Yeah.
And then
especially in Europe.
Yeah, and they were the pettiness here talking about Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter. That's serious thing talking about. I don't see him ever a policeman. You see me? If those guys that they had killed was the guys that was responsible for killing the policeman, I have no problem with that. But when they kill innocent people, that's a total different thing you're talking about. I know the first time they did it in Mova some time ago, but the guys was running away and going away when they killed them too. The chief of down Maruga, who the police killed, you understand? And this was nothing out of that yet, you know. But in this country here, when the police protects the rich and the 1%, they are the ones that they're protecting. That's how the system is designed, you understand? So when they say they're protecting, they're protecting those who have against those who don't have. And this is not something that is going on now. That all over the world is the same thing they do. Protect, you understand, those who have. So when I hear them talking about that, it's a sad thing to see a serious thing like that. We're talking about people, slavery, we went through a period of destruction of the self. All of that has something to do with the behavior pattern probably of the youth today. That type of thing went on during slavery. And you come and talk a thing here. But anyway, a wrong is a wrong. If it is wrong, it is wrong. If you kill innocent people, you have no right to kill innocent people. And I want to see, because most time, the PCA and this people say they investigate, we don't get the results, you know. We don't get no results. Only hear the investigator, and that's all about it. You don't hear nothing coming out of that again. If it was some Chinese or some Indians or some Caucasians that they are killed there, you understand, it would be a whole different, you understand, matter of color in Trinidad and Tobago. The last time they killed, what you named the Bryce, what is it? Something boys. When they kill him, he going away. Brad Boy, you understand, he going away. He kill and he going away. You understand? But you have a good evening and be home safe.
Thanks a lot, my brother. Caller, good evening. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening, Brother David.
Good evening to you.
Brother David, there's one little problem that is worrying in this country for years, and nobody seems to want to talk about it because they say freedom of worship or religion. Now, when a religious group to be beaten a black oboli, or what they call a black traitor, or whatever they call Warren or so, right, who take somebody's wife and whatnot, but this person is black, and every year this religious group at their celebration is beating this black oboli. What are they putting in the minds of the children in a society like this? Think about it.
Rawan.
What are they putting in the minds of the children?
Yeah, you're talking about Rawan, right?
Yes. That is that anything black, you must hate it. I see this as something that should be curtailed or either banned by the so-called religious leader of that particular religion, because that is painting a nasty, racist picture against black people. It is done in a subtle manner,
right?
But we have to understand it, right? Another problem is in this society that is, I don't know how people could mash up an agricultural land that was planted by black people on Shagaramas and come now and take some black youth and use a black woman and put her with these youths projecting an image on TV that they're trying to help these black youth. When they destroy agricultural land that was fertilized and agriculture took place down in Shagaramas. I don't know if you remember that particular incident under the last government.
The Shagaramas farmers.
Yes.
Of course.
There these people was trying to get back the land that they owned for years when the Americans was given the land by...
Oh, no, you're not talking about Shagaramas farmers. You're talking about Brother Noel Augustine.
Yes,
Noel Augustus.
Huh?
You're talking about Brother Noel, Augustus Noel. Augustus Noel.
Yes. But the point I'm making is the people who run these African planters off of the land bulldoze all the agricultural crops. I don't know if you remember that. Bulldoze them. right? And now the same people now come pick up a black woman with some black youths, basically black Muslim youths from the way I see these fellas was dressed, and pretend that she helping them up in La Okita on behalf of the same party that's destroyed black people agricultural land, destroyed the agricultural farm, the mega farm that Mr. Manning had put on. Why our people, Jamaican people, use them so easily for political and other purposes? This is my contribution.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for calling. All right, so I just got the bed started. But the technical problems are still not completely solved as yet. It's 10:30 in Trinidad and Tobago, my people, and we're taking your calls. Good evening, caller.
Good evening, Brother David.
Good evening to you.
Are you hearing me?
You got a new phone, for sure. For sure. I am telling you that you got a new phone. Am I right?
Yes, I did.
You see? You see?
Just for you, just for you.
Wow.
Oh, gosh.
I don't know what you care to tell us what kind of phone you had before?
It was one of the